Are you looking for news on the Canon EOS R1, leaked specifications, and expecting a fall announcement? And what other cameras should we expect to get before we get that R1 announcement? Details coming up, but first I encourage you to subscribe and choose all notifications so you're kept informed on the latest camera gear, news, and rumors. In the early hours of this morning, a trusted source told me that we're supposed to be getting 3 to 4 Canon cameras before we get the announcement of the Canon EOS R1. And I've got some thoughts on what those 3 to 4 cameras are going to be. First up, the Canon EOS RP successor, which I believe is going to be called the Canon EOS R9. Then we have the Canon EOS R, and I believe its successor is going to be the Canon EOS R8, followed by a much anticipated camera by at least a select few, and that's the high megapixel version of the Canon EOS R5, the R5s with 100 plus megapixels, and then of course the Canon EOS R1, the flagship full-frame camera by Canon to replace the 1DX Mark III. And we might also get another APS-C censored camera in there, but we'll just have to wait and see. First up, let's go ahead and take a look at the Canon EOS RP successor, the Canon EOS R9. To properly frame the specifications for the Canon EOS R9, I think it's really helpful to take a look at the current camera, the Canon EOS RP specifications. It has a 26.2 megapixel full-frame sensor, a Digic 8 image processor, and can shoot at 5 frames per second. And of course, it has that dual pixel autofocus system. In terms of video specifications, it can shoot 24 and 25 frames per second. In 4K, it can shoot up to 60 frames per second in 1080. It has a single UHS 2 card slot. The EVF is 2.36 million dots, and it has a 3-inch flippy screen. And again, the price for this camera can be had for between $899 and $999. So now when we look at the Canon EOS R9, the successor to the Canon EOS RP, let's first tackle that price. Previous rumors on the Canon EOS RP successor from Canon Rumors said that it's going to be listed at $899 and come with an optional EVF. However, that was about a year and a half ago, and with all the price increases we've seen across the board, all Canon cameras and lenses have gone up in price. I wouldn't be surprised if this camera comes out at $999 instead of $899. The Canon EOS R9 will have a 20 to 30 megapixel sensor. And I know what you're thinking, Simon, why such a large range? The Canon EOS RP had a 26.2 megapixel sensor, and it did. The EOS R has a 30.3 megapixel sensor. But look at the Canon EOS R at $2499, it only has a 20 megapixel sensor. So I'm not sure what Canon's going to do here. I'm really not sure what their cripple hammer is going to do. So I think it's safe to say that the Canon EOS R9 will have somewhere between 20 and 30 megapixels. But now for the good news. The Digic X image processor is also going to be in this camera. The R9 is going to get the Digic X image processor just like the R7 and the R10. And the R10 is an APS-C R system camera priced at $979. So if this camera comes out at $899 or $999, I think it's pretty safe to say it's going to get the Digic X image processor. I can't see Canon using one of the old image processors. It's definitely going to be the Image X, and that's going to be really, really good news on several fronts. First is frames per second. Well, the Canon EOS RP had 5 frames per second, but with continuous autofocus, you were lucky to get 2 to 3 frames per second that were in focus. I think this camera, if we look to the R10 and the R7, we can expect to see a mechanical shutter rate of between 10 and 15 frames per second, then electronic somewhere between 20 and 30. The buffer size is definitely going to restrict that a little bit. But what about video? Well, we had a huge crop, and that was thanks in large part to the Digic 8 image processor. I think with the Digic X image processor, we're going to see a much reduced rolling shutter. I think we're going to see much more detailed 4K. And in fact, I think looking to the R10 again, I think we're going to see something like 6K oversample 4K or 5.1K oversample 4K, depending on what the sensor size is. Either way, I think we're definitely going to get some oversampled 4K at 24, 25, and 30 frames per second. In 1080, I think we're going to get up to 60 frames per second, but there is an outside chance that we might get 120 frames per second. And of course, we're going to get Canon's famous dual pixel autofocus version 2, the same autofocus system found in the R5 and the R6. Vehicle detection, animal detection, human detection, of course, it's bird eye detection. And I've been out shooting turtles, squirrels, and a whole bunch of other animals, and it seems to lock on really well. So I'd expect to see that same focus system in the Canon EOS R9. And like the RP, it's going to have a single SD card slot. It's going to be a UHS 2 card slot. And again, the price, probably around $899 or $999. I can't really see it being priced more than that. But again, the rumor is indicating that it's going to have an EVF as an option. So the camera won't come with an EVF, but you can purchase it for maybe $99 or $150 if you want to add it on later. The Canon EOS R was released back in October of 2019. It came with a 30.3 megapixel full-frame sensor, the Digic 8 image processor, and could shoot at 8 frames per second. But there was a bit of a caveat with that 8 frames per second. With continuous autofocus and exposure, your hit rate, well, you were lucky to get 3 frames per second where the focus was perfectly nailed. One other thing I want to talk to you about, the autofocus system. On some of the early reviews, the autofocus system was panned. Autofocus was rather slow and couldn't keep up. But Canon has since released firmware updates, and the autofocus system on the Canon EOS R is much improved. Canon EOS R could shoot 4K UHD at 24, 25, and 30 frames per second. It could shoot up to 120 frames per second, but that was in 720p. In 1080, it could shoot up to 60 frames per second. However, it did have some really nice features. You could shoot with Canon Log 1, and it could shoot 10-bit 422. However, in 10-bit 422, it was external only over HDMI. If you were shooting internally, well, you were at 8-bit, so you didn't get as much detail, but still, it was an improvement over previous cameras. But yeah, the video capabilities weren't that good with this camera. The rolling shutter was rather terrible. And again, you had a 1.6 or 1.7 times crop in video. It had a 3.69 million dot EVF, a 3-inch flippy screen, and it had a single UHS 2 card slot. No dual card slots on a camera at $15.99. Actually, when it came out, it was actually priced at $22.99. The Canon EOS R successor, the Canon EOS R8, is going to have a 20 to 30 megapixel full-frame sensor. And I know what you're thinking, 20 to 30 megapixels, are they going to give us a 30.3 megapixel sensor like they did with the Canon EOS R? Or are they going to cripple the camera and give us a 20.2 megapixel sensor found in the Canon EOS R6? And really, we don't know. I have no idea what Canon's going to do here. I was really surprised when the R6 came out with a 20 megapixel sensor when the Canon EOS R had a 26 megapixel sensor. So even though the Canon EOS RP had a 26 megapixel sensor and the Canon EOS R had a 30 megapixel sensor, I think it's definitely plausible that Canon could go and give us a 20 megapixel sensor, but this is definitely going to disappoint. So for right now, I'm just going to put a pin in this one and say we're going to get somewhere between 20 and 30 megapixels. But there is good news. We're going to be getting that same Digic X image processor. This has been an image processor that's been going out in all cameras since the Canon 1DX Mark III, the R5, the R6, the R7, and the R10. With the R10 costing $979, I can't see Canon not putting the Digic X image processor in this camera, unless of course they come out with a Digic XS or a Digic X11. But either way, this is going to be very, very good news for continuous shooting. So instead of being stuck at 8 frames per second and more around 3 frames per second with continuous autofocus and exposure, I think like the R7 and the R10, this camera is going to be capable of around 15 frames per second mechanical and somewhere between 20 and 30 frames per second electronic. So it's going to separate the Canon EOS R8 from the R9, the R7, and the R10 is not just its mechanical shutter speed and electronic shutter speed, but that it's going to be able to shoot for longer with a much faster buffer. And thanks to that Digic X image processor, video capabilities in this camera are going to be a lot better. That rolling shutter that we got in the EOS R is going to be almost eliminated. And we're going to be able to shoot at a much more detailed 4K video, giving us oversample rates like we got with the R7 and the R10. Now, not knowing the sensor size, I don't know if we're going to get something like 5.1K oversample 4K like we did in the R6, or if we're going to get 6K oversample 4K like the R10, or 7K oversample 4K like we did with the Canon EOS R7. But I think oversample 4K is absolutely essential. This camera is going to be priced somewhere between the Canon EOS RP replacement and the Canon EOS R6. So mid-price, somewhere around $1,599 to $1,799. So not doing oversample 4K will just absolutely cripple this camera, and it's going to disappoint an awful lot of people. And of course, it's going to get dual pixel autofocus, the same autofocus system found in the R5 and the R6, the R7 and the R10. So it has vehicle detection, human head, body detection, human eye detection, bird eye detection. And when it comes to other animals like squirrels and turtles, I've been out shooting, and depending on the lighting situation, I can get anywhere from 80% down to about 40%. So when it comes to shooting other animals that, well, are not birds or humans, I tend to shoot an awful lot of B-roll, knowing that in post, I'm going to have, well, not the best hit rate, but still to be able to have fast-moving subjects like animals where it's going to be able to lock onto the eye of squirrels and other animals, I think is a definite improvement in the Canon EOS R8. And unlike the Canon EOS R, I believe that this camera is going to have Canon Log 3. It's going to be able to shoot 10-bit 422 internal. And of course, we're going to get zebras because the Canon EOS R didn't have zebras. And in terms of pricing, like I said, it's going to be mid-price, somewhere probably around $1,500 to $1,799. And unlike the EOS R, it's going to have dual UHS 2 card slots, so that's going to be a definite improvement over the Canon EOS R. The Canon EOS R5s has been rumored for an awful long time. Canon Rumors put out several rumors about this camera going back to 2020, saying that Canon's working on a 100 plus megapixel version of, well, the 5 series. And then we got the R5 announcement, and it was rumored to be an R5 variant offering over 100 megapixels. We haven't heard much, but Canon Rumors recently came out and said that they believe that we're going to get some sort of announcement in the latter half of 2022. So the Canon EOS RP, we don't know anything about it. All we know is that it's rumored to have north of 100 megapixels. We don't know it's going to be around 102, 105, or something crazy like 120 frames per second. And yes, Canon was actually working on a DSLR that was capable of 120 frames per second, but there were many issues and challenges with that. But with the Canon EOS R5, with the Canon EOS R1 that's due to be coming out, we're going to have much faster image processors and sensors, be able to push a whole lot more data through the system. And of course, CF Express cards have gotten an awful lot faster. The Angelbird AV Pro cards, the Mark IIs, have a minimum sustained write speed of 1,480 megabytes per second, not bits. That's 1.5 gigabytes per second. That's a huge amount of data. So data in transition, data at rest, the Canon EOS R5s with 100 plus megapixels, I definitely think is a very real possibility. And of course, there's a chance we might get another APS-C censored camera, something that fits right around that $500 price point, whether it be $499 or $599. But the camera that a lot of you are really excited about is the Canon EOS R1. Last month, I put out a video about the Canon EOS R1, talking about the rumored specifications for this camera, summing up all the rumors we have, and then doing my own analysis and opinion of the Canon EOS R1. I spent about 12 minutes covering all the specifications. Nothing has changed since then, so I highly recommend you watch this video here. But I also covered off every 1 series camera from the very first Canon EOS 1 all the way up to the 1DX Mark III and the Canon EOS R1. It's a 30-minute video where I spent about 2 minutes covering off each of the 1 series cameras, although there are a few variants I left off that weren't part of the main line, including the digital cinema cameras. I was actually thinking of getting one of those, so if you want to know the full rumored specifications for the Canon EOS R1, go ahead and watch this video. But in terms of the dates haven't really changed. We're due to get some sort of an announcement of the Canon EOS R1 late this year. That might be November. They might do what Nikon did with the Z9 and do an October 28 or 29 announcement. But if things keep slowing the way I suspect they are, we might just get a development announcement, and then we might see this camera being released around, well, this time next year in 2023, sometime between May and June. And I'm really interested in this camera. What's really set my expectations is a recent Canon Rumors story talking about how this is going to be the master of everything. And I know from previous 1 series cameras that the 1 series camera always has the best stills capabilities of any other Canon camera, and it always has the best video capabilities of any other stills hybrid camera put out by Canon, ignoring the cinema line. And we look at the Canon EOS R5 and what it can do with 8K video, raw, up to 30 frames per second. So doing 60 frames per second wouldn't be, well, unexpected, since the Nikon Z9 can do that. And I could actually see Canon coming out with 8K at 120 frames per second, giving us 4K 120 that's a lot more detailed, and giving us the ability to maybe work with 4K RAW. And I get it, because if you're going to do full sensor readout, it's not going to be 4K RAW, right? But I think you know where I'm getting at. So we got a lot of cameras still due to come out from Canon this year. We got the Canon EOS RP replacement, Canon EOS R9, the Canon EOS R8, which is a successor to the EOS R, potentially another APS-C censored R system camera, and of course a high megapixel version of the Canon EOS R5, a camera that's been rumored since, well, the 5D Mark V was rumored, and of course the Canon EOS R1. And if you want to stay up to date on the latest camera news and rumors, go ahead and subscribe, but make sure you choose all notifications, because by choosing all notifications, as soon as I publish a video, YouTube's going to notify you so you can stay up to date on the latest camera news and rumors. But before I go, I want to talk about something related to Final Cut. If you guys shoot in Final Cut, I really need your help. Please go ahead and go to apple.com/feedback and provide feedback on Final Cut Pro when it comes to rendering. I love Final Cut. At $300, it offers considerable value, and I get it. DaVinci Resolve is another very, very good application at around $300 too. But I'm kind of locked into Final Cut Pro right now. I have a lot of libraries that I just don't want to convert over and deal with multiple systems. And one of the most frustrating things for me is the rendering in Final Cut Pro. I don't know what it is. I've got this one film that's 1 hour and 42 minutes long, and I'll render it out completely, then I'll export it. And the next time I load it up, guess what? It's completely forgotten all the rendering, and then it needs to be re-rendered again. And I know that what some people would say is, well, don't render, just go ahead and export it, and then everything's going to be fine. Yes and no. If you have a lot of effects, if you have some plugins, what can tend to happen is you can actually have the export process just, well, crash, collapse, fail, error out. And what I've learned to do is just go ahead and render it, and then when I go to export, I don't have any errors. And if it does error halfway through the first time around, I've lost a lot of time, so I just go ahead and render automatically. Some other things I've noticed with the rendering is that same project, I can load it up and it shows that the whole thing needs to be re-rendered. I might come back a half an hour later, and guess what? It shows that it doesn't need to be rendered. And here's the thing, I don't have auto render on. So it's really, really bizarre how the rendering system works, but here's how Apple works. If it gets an awful lot of complaints about something, it reprioritizes it. I've talked to several people at Apple, and they say they're aware of this issue. One person even said to me, oh, it's back. Yeah, we had a problem with that in the past. And the only way to get this resolved is to get enough of us going to apple.com/feedback and providing feedback on Final Cut Pro X, asking them to fix the rendering system. Provide as much detail as you can, because that's the best way for them to take it seriously. And I'd be much appreciated. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.